power rarely screams. It whispers. When a veteran gate agent at JFK's Terminal 4 glared at the black man standing quietly in the first-class priority lane, she didn't see a VIP. She saw a plain grey hoodie, faded denim, and a prime target for her escalating morning frustrations. She saw someone she believed fundamentally did not belong in her exclusive airspace. What she failed to see was the newly minted majority owner of the very airline she worked for, executing a silent undercover audit of his failing acquisition. By the time she realized her colossal mistake, after publicly humiliating him and voiding his ticket, she hadn't just ended her career. She had triggered a corporate earthquake that would be felt across the entire aviation industry. John F. Kennedy International Airport was a cathedral of controlled chaos on a brisk Tuesday morning in October. Inside Terminal 4, the air hummed with the collective anxiety of 10,000 travelers, the relentless squeaking of rubber wheels on polished terrazzo floors, and the sterile, disembodied voices of the public address system announcing final boarding calls. Amidst the swirling sea of panicked tourists and stressed business travelers stood Gate B-22, the designated launching pad for Meridian Airways Flight 808, a heavily booked transatlantic red-eye bound for London Heathrow. Meridian Airways was a legacy carrier, a brand that had once been synonymous with mid-century jet-set glamour. But over the past decade, the airline had hemorrhaged cash, goodwill, and customer loyalty. Its planes were aging, its stock price had plummeted to single digits, and its customer service reputation was arguably the worst in North America. It was a dying behemoth, ripe for a hostile takeover or a complete liquidation. Enter Sterling Hayes. At 39 years old, Sterling was a self-made titan in the private equity sector. He had built Hayes Capital from a cramped one-room office in Chicago into a multi-billion-dollar firm known for acquiring distressed assets, gutting their toxic corporate cultures, and turning them into highly profitable enterprises. Sterling was ruthless when it came to numbers, but deeply empathetic when it came to human capital. He believed that a company rotted from the top down, but the rot was most visible at the front lines. 3 weeks ago, Hayes Capital had quietly finalized the acquisition of a 51% controlling stake in Meridian Airways. The ink on the SEC filings was barely dry, and the public announcement wasn't scheduled until the following Monday. To the world and to the employees of Meridian, the airline was still staggering along under its old, incompetent board of directors. Sterling despised boardrooms. He despised sanitized reports and the polished lies told by middle managers trying to save their annual bonuses. If he was going to invest $3 billion into salvaging Meridian, he needed to feel the rot for himself. He needed to experience the airline exactly as an ordinary, unprivileged customer would. For his undercover audit, Sterling dressed specifically to disappear. He wore a pair of well-worn Levi's, comfortably scuffed Chelsea boots, and a plain, unmarked grey zip-up hoodie. To a trained eye, the hoodie was spun from pure Loro Piana cashmere, and the boots were bespoke Italian leather. But to the casual observer, he looked like a guy who might have just finished a shift at a tech startup or a local warehouse. He carried a battered leather duffel bag slung over one shoulder. There was no entourage, no personal assistant, no flashy Rolex flashing from his wrist. Standing behind the podium at Gate B-22 was Stella Higgins. Stella was an 8-year veteran of Meridian Airways, a gate agent who had survived corporate restructurings, union strikes, and countless holiday travel meltdowns. Somewhere along the way, however, survival had morphed into profound bitterness. Stella viewed passengers not as customers, but as adversaries. She was the absolute ruler of her small, carpeted fiefdom at the gate, and she wielded her minimal authority with maximum cruelty. She was known among her colleagues for a sharp tongue and a disturbing talent for profiling passengers, deciding in a split second who deserved common decency and who was going to be the outlet for her daily stress. Today, Stella was already at her boiling point. Flight 808 was delayed by 45 minutes due to a catering issue. The gate area was overflowing with irritable passengers, and the coffee machine in the break room was broken. She tapped aggressively on her keyboard, her manicured nails clacking against the plastic keys like a rapid-fire metronome, her jaw set in a permanent scowl. Meridian Airways announces the boarding of our first class and Diamond Elite members for Flight 808 to London. Stella finally barked into the microphone, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical level of condescension. Only first class. If you are not in Group 1, do not crowd my boarding area. I will not scan your pass. Sterling, standing quietly near a charging station, slung his leather duffel over his shoulder and made his way toward the lane marked with the gold-lettered priority sign. He had paid for seat 1A, the prime real estate, in the international first-class cabin, specifically to test how the airline's most premium, high-paying customers were treated when they didn't fit the expected demographic mold. As Sterling stepped onto the blue carpet of the priority lane, Stella's eyes darted upward, her gaze locked onto him, sweeping from the hood of his grey sweatshirt down to his scuffed boots and back up to his dark, calm eyes. In an instant, the micro-calculations in her head triggered a deeply ingrained, toxic bias. He doesn't belong here, she thought, her posture immediately stiffening. Economy is Group 4. He's trying to pull a fast one. She uncrossed her arms and stepped out from behind the safety of her podium, physically blocking the entrance to the scanner. Her expression was a masterclass in performative customer service, a wide, entirely lifeless smile, masking eyes that burned with confrontational authority. "Excuse me, sir," Stella projected her voice. She spoke loudly enough that the first few rows of passengers sitting in the crowded waiting area turned their heads to watch. "This lane is for first class and Diamond Elite members only. Main cabin boarding will not commence for another 30 minutes. I need you to step aside and clear the walkway for our premium guests." Sterling stopped. He didn't flinch, nor did he look embarrassed. He simply reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out his smartphone, pulling up the digital boarding pass on the Meridian app. "I'm aware," Sterling replied, his voice a low, even baritone that cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. "I'm checking in for seat 1A, flight 808. Stella didn't even look at the phone he was holding out. She let out a short, breathy scoff, a sound of pure disbelief. "Seat 1A, she repeated, the skepticism practically oozing from her pores. "Sir, seat 1A is our premier international suite. Those tickets run upwards of $9,000 one way. Are you absolutely sure you're at the right gate? Perhaps you're flying out of Terminal 2 on a budget carrier?" The insult was not subtle. A murmur rippled through the passengers sitting closest to the podium. An older white gentleman in a tailored navy blazer, standing in line just behind Sterling, shifted uncomfortably and checked his own Rolex, sighing loudly to signal his impatience. "I'm at the right gate," Sterling said, his patience absolute. He was taking mental notes, the complete lack of professionalism, the immediate presumption of fraud, the racial profiling. It was worse than the data had shown. "My name is Sterling Hayes. If you'd like to scan the barcode, we can keep the line moving." Stella snatched the phone from his hand, a clear violation of protocol. She turned back to her podium, aggressively pressing the scanner against the screen of Sterling's device. The machine beeped, a sharp, affirming green light flashing across the scanner bed. It was a valid pass, but Stella wasn't satisfied. She stared at her monitor, her eyes narrowing as she read the passenger manifest. Beside the name Hayes, Sterling was a small, flashing red icon. In Meridian's archaic IT system, a flashing red icon in the priority tier meant the ticket had been flagged by corporate headquarters. Usually, this meant the passenger was an ultra-high net worth individual, a celebrity, or an executive whose travel was strictly monitored and required white glove treatment. The system specifically locked the ticket from being altered or downgraded by gate staff to prevent accidental mishandling of VIPs. Stella, however, had never encountered this specific corporate lock in her 8 years. To her biased mind, a red flashing icon next to a black man in a hoodie meant only one thing. The ticket was flagged for fraud. "I knew it," Stella muttered, though loud enough for the microphone on her desk to catch the sound, amplifying it slightly. She looked up, her face flushed with the triumphant glow of someone who had just caught a thief. "This boarding pass is restricted. It's flagged." "Flagged?" Sterling raised a single eyebrow. He knew exactly what the red icon meant. His executive assistant had hard-coded his profile into the Meridian mainframe the night before to ensure the board of directors couldn't track his flight paths during the audit. "Don't play dumb with me," Stella snapped, her voice rising an octave. The older man in the navy blazer behind Sterling leaned forward. "Excuse me," the man in the blazer interjected, his tone aristocratic and irritated. "Is there a problem here? Some of us have meetings in London and would like to board." Stella's demeanor instantly shifted. She offered the man a warm, apologetic smile, her entire body language softening. "I am so sorry for the delay, Mr. Pendleton. We are just dealing with a ticketing irregularity. Someone seems to be using an unauthorized corporate override to access the first-class cabin. I'll have this cleared up in just a moment." She turned back to Sterling, the warmth instantly vanishing, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic sneer. "Sir, I need you to step out of the line immediately. You are holding up my actual first-class passengers. This ticket is locked by corporate, which means it was either purchased with a stolen credit card or you manipulated an employee discount code. Meridian Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for ticketing fraud." Sterling's expression remained terrifyingly placid. Inside, however, the gavel had fallen. Stella Higgins was not just a bad employee. She was a massive liability. She was the physical embodiment of the toxic rot he had come to eradicate. "I purchased that ticket yesterday evening directly through the Meridian website," Sterling stated calmly, ensuring his voice remained perfectly measured. "There is no fraud. The lock on that profile is a corporate VIP designation. I suggest you call your shift supervisor or the station manager before you escalate this further." "A VIP?" Stella let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the gate area. Several passengers in the economy section began to stand up on their tiptoes, craning their necks to watch the drama unfold. "You? A VIP? Sir, our VIPs don't fly in sweatpants carrying gym bags. They don't try to scam their way into suites that cost more than their cars. I am not calling my supervisor because I don't need my supervisor to tell me what a fraudulent ticket looks like. Now, step out of the line, or I will call Port Authority police and have you physically removed from the terminal." The silence that fell over gate B22 was deafening. Even the irritable Mr. Pendleton took a half-step back, suddenly uncomfortable with the sheer venom radiating from the gate agent. Threatening to call the police on a calm, compliant passenger over a ticketing dispute was a massive escalation. Sterling didn't move. He stood his ground on the blue carpet, his eyes locking onto Stella's with an intensity that finally made her falter, just for a fraction of a second. She saw no fear in him, no panic, no embarrassment. Just cold, calculating evaluation. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a quieter, almost dangerous register. "You have a valid, scanned boarding pass in your hand. The system has flagged the profile with a corporate lock, which you admit you do not fully understand. Instead of verifying the lock with a manager, you have publicly accused me of credit card fraud. You have ridiculed my appearance, and you are now threatening me with armed law enforcement. Is that an accurate summary of Meridian Airways' customer service protocol?" Stella felt a sudden, inexplicable prickle of unease at the base of her neck. Normal passengers didn't speak like this. Normal passengers yelled, or pleaded, or caused a scene. This man was speaking like a prosecuting attorney, laying out a timeline of a crime. But Stella's pride was too inflated, her audience too large, to back down now. She was an 8-year veteran. She ran this gate. "I am cancelling your check-in," Stella declared, her fingers slamming onto her keyboard. She navigated to the override screen. Because of the VIP lock, the system prompted her with a severe warning. "Unauthorized to alter executive profile. Override requires Tier 1. Management clearance." Frustrated and operating purely on spite, Stella hit the physical print button, printing out a paper copy of his boarding pass. She took the paper, held it up so Sterling could see it, and deliberately ripped it straight down the middle. "Your ticket is void," Stella said, tossing the torn pieces of paper onto the counter. "You are officially denied boarding on Flight 808. I am placing a ban on your profile for fraudulent activity. You can try your luck at the customer service desk in Terminal 1, but I highly doubt they'll rebook you. Now, get out of my priority lane, or I am hitting the panic button for airport security." Sterling looked at the torn pieces of paper resting near her keyboard. He then looked up at the security camera, mounted directly above the podium, noting its position. Good. It had captured everything, complete with audio. "You didn't just void my ticket," Sterling said softly. "You just voided your own career." "Security!" Stella shouted, reaching beneath her desk. "That won't be necessary," Sterling replied. He took a deliberate step back out of the line, allowing Mr. Pendleton to nervously shuffle past him toward the jet bridge. Sterling didn't leave the gate area. Instead, he walked over to a quiet corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, pulled his phone from his pocket, and dialed a number. He bypassed regular customer service. He bypassed the terminal manager. He dialed directly into the private cell phone of David Collins, the Senior Vice President of Global Operations for Meridian Airways. David was one of the few legacy executives Sterling had decided to keep on board after the acquisition, precisely because David knew the company's operational flaws and had been begging the old board for resources to fix them. The phone rang twice before it was answered. "Sterling," David's voice came through, sounding slightly breathless, likely pacing his office at the corporate headquarters in Atlanta. "Tell me you're not calling to say you're backing out of the deal. The press release goes out in 3 days." "The deal is solid, David," Sterling said, his eyes fixed on Stella, who was now aggressively scanning the boarding passes of the rest of the first-class cabin, though she kept shooting nervous, venomous glances in his direction. "But we have a severe, localized infection at JFK, Terminal 4, Gate B, 22. JFK, David paused. "Wait, you're doing the audit today? I thought you were flying out tomorrow." "I changed my schedule. It's a good thing I did. I was just denied boarding for Flight 808. "Denied boarding?" David's voice spiked with alarm. "Why? Is the flight oversold? We have strict protocols against bumping VIPs. "I wasn't bumped," Sterling interrupted, his tone chillingly calm. "I was profiled. Your gate agent, a woman named Stella Higgins, decided I didn't look wealthy enough to belong in Seat 1A. She accused me of using a stolen credit card, publicly humiliated me in front of 50 passengers, tore up my boarding pass, and threatened to call the Port Authority police to have me arrested. There was dead silence on the line. For a terrifying 5 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of a jet engine through the glass. She did what? David finally stammered, the blood draining from his face all the way in Atlanta. She tried to bypass the Tier 1 executive lock on my profile, Sterling continued, reading the employee ID number off the badge he had memorized. When she couldn't, she printed a physical pass and tore it up. David, this isn't just poor training. This is a culture of supreme arrogance and blatant discrimination. If she felt comfortable doing this to me, how many everyday passengers has she abused over the last 8 years? Sterling, I have no words. I am deploying the JFK station manager to your gate immediately. I will have her removed from the podium. No, Sterling commanded, his voice hardening into the unquestionable tone of a man who controlled billions of dollars in assets. Don't send the station manager. You call the regional director of East Coast operations. I want the highest-ranking Meridian executive in the tri-state area down at this gate in the next 10 minutes. And David? Yes, Mr. Hayes. Keep the line open. You're going to want to hear this. Sterling lowered the phone from his ear, but didn't hang up. He turned around and began to walk back toward the podium. The main cabin boarding had just been called, and a long, snaking line of exhausted travelers was shuffling forward. Stella was right in her element, snapping at people for their carry-on sizes, her power trip fully restored. She looked up and saw Sterling approaching again, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She slammed her hand down on the public address microphone. "I warned you!" She practically screamed over the speakers, her voice echoing through the entire terminal. "Security is on the way. You are trespassing in my gate area." Sterling stopped 10 feet from her podium, standing with his hands casually in his pockets. He didn't say a word. He just waited for the corporate axe to fall, and he knew, with absolute certainty, it was going to be deafening. 2 Port Authority police officers approached Gate B-22 with the heavy, purposeful strides of men expecting a physical altercation. Outfitted in dark, tactical uniforms, radios crackling on their shoulders, and hands resting cautiously near their duty belts, they cut a path through the sea of delayed passengers. The crowd instinctively parted, a ripple of anxious murmurs spreading as cell phone cameras were discreetly, and some blatantly, raised to record the impending confrontation. Stella Higgins stood tall behind her podium, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She had pressed the silent alarm situated beneath her desk, a button reserved exclusively for severe security threats, unruly passengers, or violent incidents. To her, Sterling Hayes was all 3, simply by virtue of defying her absolute authority. "Officers, thank God," Stella projected, adopting the breathless, distressed tone of a victim. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Sterling, who remained standing exactly where he had been, his hands resting loosely in the pockets of his Loro Piana cashmere hoodie. "This man is trespassing. He attempted to use a fraudulent boarding pass to access the international first-class suite. When I caught him and voided his transaction, he became hostile, refused to leave the boarding area, and is now intimidating my staff and passengers. I want him removed from Terminal 4 immediately, and I want to press charges for the ticketing fraud." Officer Miller, a burly man with a graying mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped in front of Sterling, effectively cutting off his path to the jet bridge. His partner, Officer Davies, flanked Sterling to the right, assessing the threat. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the podium and produce a valid government-issued ID," Officer Miller said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Sterling slowly withdrew his right hand from his pocket, holding a sleek, black titanium American Express Centurion card and his New York State driver's license. He handed the license over without a flicker of hesitation. "I have no intention of causing a disturbance, officer," Sterling stated calmly, his voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the terminal. "My name is Sterling Hayes. I am booked on Flight 808, Seat 1A. The agent behind that desk tore up my physical boarding pass after her system threw a corporate lock she didn't recognize. She then proceeded to publicly humiliate me and accuse me of credit card theft without verifying a single piece of information with her superiors." Stella scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes for the benefit of the officers and the watching crowd. "He's lying. His profile was flagged red. Red means fraud or stolen miles. He doesn't belong in first class, and he certainly doesn't belong on this aircraft. Arrest him." Officer Miller glanced down at the driver's license, then back up at Sterling. He didn't see the hostility Stella had described. He saw a man radiating absolute, unshakable control. The situation felt off. "Ma'am, a red flag in a computer system isn't strictly probable cause for arrest without further investigation," Officer Miller replied, turning slightly toward Stella. "Did you verify this fraud with your corporate security desk?" "I don't need to," Stella snapped, her patience fraying. She was furious that the police weren't immediately tackling Sterling to the carpet. "I am the senior gate agent for Meridian Airways. My word is final at this gate. Remove him, or I'm calling my station manager to have you reprimanded for failing to secure a sterile airport area." Officer Davies frowned, his hand resting on his radio. He was about to call in the license to dispatch when the sharp, piercing squeal of rubber tires echoed across the polished terrazzo floor. A high-speed airport transport cart, the kind usually reserved for transporting elderly passengers or VIPs between terminals, careened around the corner of the concourse. It skidded to a violent halt just outside the perimeter of Gate B22. A man practically threw himself out of the passenger seat before the cart had even completely stopped. Louis Beaumont was the regional vice president of East Coast operations for Meridian Airways. He was 55 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal Brooks Brothers suit, and currently sweating profusely despite the terminal's aggressive air conditioning. His tie was slightly askew, and he was clutching a secure company tablet to his chest like a shield. David Collins, the senior VP of operations in Atlanta, had called Louis 3 minutes prior, his voice trembling as he ordered Louis to sprint from his Terminal 2 office to Gate B22 immediately. "Stand down! Everyone, stand down right now!" Louis shouted, his voice cracking with panic as he shoved his way past the barricade of stunned economy passengers. Stella's smug expression dissolved into genuine confusion. Regional vice presidents did not come to the gates. They stayed in their plush, soundproofed offices overlooking the tarmac, analyzing spreadsheets and hosting vendor lunches. She had only seen Louis Beaumont twice in her 8-year career, both times from a distance during mandatory corporate town halls. "Mr. Beaumont," Stella stammered, smoothing her uniform vest. What are you doing here?" "It's fine, sir. I have a handle on the situation. We just have a hostile passenger trying to commit ticketing fraud. The police are handling it." Louis completely ignored her. He shoved past the podium, nearly tripping over the stanchion belt, and inserted himself directly between Sterling Hayes and the 2 Port Authority officers. "Officers, my profound apologies," Louis said, holding up his gold-plated Meridian executive badge. "There has been a catastrophic internal error. This man is not a trespasser, nor is he committing fraud. He is a fully ticketed passenger with maximum corporate clearance." Officer Miller narrowed his eyes, handing Sterling his driver's license back. Your gate agent just hit the panic button and demanded we arrest him for credit card theft and hostility. My gate agent is horribly, entirely mistaken, Louis said, his voice trembling slightly as he finally turned to look directly at Sterling. Louis recognized him instantly. He had spent the entire previous week reviewing confidential transition documents bearing Sterling's signature. Louis swallowed hard, his face pale. Mr. Hayes, I cannot adequately express my apologies. David Collins is on the line with me. We are entirely at your disposal. Sterling took his driver's license, sliding it smoothly back into his pocket. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he look at the police officers. His gaze remained locked on Stella Higgins, whose face had suddenly drained of all color. I told you to keep the line open, David, Sterling said aloud, addressing the phone that he pulled back out of his hoodie pocket. He put it on speaker, holding it up so the audio would carry across the gate desk. I'm here, Sterling. David Collins's voice crackled through the speaker, echoing slightly in the tense silence of the boarding area. I've heard everything. Stella stared at the phone, then at Louis Beaumont, and finally at Sterling. Her brain struggled to process the rapidly shifting power dynamics. The man in the cheap-looking grey sweatshirt had the senior VP of operations on speakerphone, and the regional VP was practically bowing to him. Mr. Beaumont, Stella tried, her voice losing its brassy edge, wavering into a defensive whine. I was just following protocol. His ticket had a red flag in the Sabre system. I couldn't override it. You assumed, Sterling interrupted, his voice dropping to a glacial chill that silenced her instantly. Let's talk about your assumptions, Ms. Higgins. You assumed that because I was wearing a hoodie and denim, I could not possibly afford a seat in your first-class cabin. You assumed that my ticket was fraudulent. You assumed that it was acceptable to publicly ridicule my appearance, tear up a legally binding contract of carriage, and attempt to weaponize law enforcement against a compliant passenger. Sterling stepped closer to the podium. The Port Authority officers, realizing they had stepped into a massive corporate crossfire, quietly backed up a few paces, crossing their arms and watching the drama unfold. Do you know what a Tier 1 red flag means in the Meridian mainframe, Ms. Higgins? Sterling asked. Stella shook her head slowly, her throat too dry to speak. Tell her, Louis, Sterling commanded, his eyes never leaving Stella's. Louis Beaumont cleared his throat, adjusting his crooked tie with shaking fingers. A Tier 1 red lock is a maximum security profile designation. It means the passenger is a member of the executive board, a major shareholder, or a vital corporate asset. The lock prevents local staff from accidentally downgrading, rerouting, or cancelling the ticket without direct authorization from the C-suite in Atlanta. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers standing closest to the podium. Mr. Pendleton, the wealthy man in the navy blazer who had complained earlier, suddenly found his shoes incredibly interesting. A member of the executive board? Stella whispered, the reality of her situation finally crashing down upon her. She looked at Sterling, truly seeing him for the first time. The quiet confidence, the refusal to back down, the direct line to the top brass. You work for corporate? No, Sterling said simply. He tapped the torn pieces of his boarding pass, still resting on the counter. I don't work for corporate. As of last Thursday, Hayes Capital finalized a $3 billion acquisition of Meridian Airways. I am the CEO of Hayes Capital, which means, Ms. Higgins, I do not work for this airline. I own it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs in the epicenter of a detonation. Even the ambient noise of the airport seemed to fade away. Stella Higgins physically staggered back, her hip catching the edge of the keyboard tray. You're the owner. "51%, Sterling clarified coldly. And my first executive action was to conduct an unannounced, undercover audit of our frontline customer service, starting with our most premium, high-revenue routes. I wanted to see exactly why Meridian Airways is bleeding millions of dollars a quarter, why our brand reputation is the lowest in the industry, and why our customers despise flying with us." Sterling leaned slightly over the podium. "You just gave me a $3 billion answer in less than 10 minutes. "Mr. Hayes, please," Stella stammered, tears of sheer panic finally welling in her eyes. Her arrogance had entirely evaporated, replaced by the desperate terror of a woman realizing she had just destroyed her livelihood on a public stage. "I am so sorry. I've been under so much stress. The flight was delayed. The passengers were yelling at me all morning. I just made a terrible, terrible mistake. Please, I have 8 years with this company. I need this job." "Empathy is a fascinating concept, isn't it?" Sterling replied, unmoved. "You demand it now, when your own survival is on the line. Yet you offered absolutely none to me when you believed I was beneath you. You didn't just make a mistake, Ms. Higgins. A mistake is scanning the wrong barcode. What you did was execute a systemic, discriminatory attack based on your own toxic biases." Sterling turned his attention back to his phone. "David." "Lewis." "Yes, Sterling." Both executives answered simultaneously, one through the speaker, one standing right beside him. "This is exactly the rot I was talking about," Sterling declared, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "We cannot rebuild this airline's reputation if the people greeting our passengers view them with contempt. Effective immediately, I want a full review of our gate agent training protocols regarding bias and conflict de-escalation." "Consider it done, sir," David said from Atlanta. "We'll draft the mandate today." "As for Gate B-22, Sterling continued, finally turning his gaze back to the weeping gate agent. "Miss Higgins, your behavior today was an egregious violation of our Code of Conduct, Federal Aviation, Non-Discrimination Statutes, and basic human decency. You are a massive liability to this brand." "Please," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Lewis," Sterling said, looking at the regional VP, "take her SIDA badge, confiscate her corporate credentials. She is suspended immediately, without pay, pending a formal termination review on Monday morning. Have security escort her out of Terminal 4. Lewis nodded sharply. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, immediately." He stepped behind the podium, reaching out to take the employee ID hanging around Stella's neck. She didn't fight him. She surrendered the plastic badge with a trembling hand, her career officially over. "Officers," Sterling said, finally turning to the Port Authority police. "I appreciate your prompt response, but there is no security threat here. Just a corporate restructuring." Officer Miller nodded slowly, a faint smirk tugging at his mustache. "Understood, Mr. Hayes. Have a safe flight." Sterling turned back to Louis Beaumont, who was frantically typing an override code into the Sabre terminal to resurrect the voided ticket. The machine buzzed, spitting out a fresh, pristine, first-class boarding pass. "Your pass, Mr. Hayes," Louis said, handing it over with 2 hands, a gesture of absolute respect. "Flight 808 is ready for you. The captain has been notified of your presence and is holding the door." Sterling took the ticket. He picked up his battered leather duffel bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked past the sobbing former gate agent. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the remaining passengers at Gate B-22, the very people Stella had tried to impress with her cruelty, did something highly unusual for a crowded airport terminal. They began to clap. Stepping off the enclosed, climate-controlled jet bridge and into the cabin of the Boeing 777-300ER, Sterling Hayes immediately noted the scent of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Meridian Airways' first-class cabin was a relic of the early 2000s. The bulkheads featured faux wood paneling that was peeling at the corners, and the oversized leather seats, while wide and deeply cushioned, lacked the sleek, private suite enclosures that modern international carriers offered. It was comfortable, but it was decidedly not competitive. "Welcome aboard, sir. Seat 1A is right this way," greeted Sarah Jenkins, the chief purser. She was a woman in her late 50s, her uniform immaculately pressed, her smile weary but genuinely warm. Unlike Stella Higgins at the gate, Sarah didn't look at Sterling's faded jeans or plain grey hoodie with disdain. She looked at him with the practiced, hospitable grace of someone who fundamentally understood the hospitality industry. "Thank you, Sarah," Sterling replied, reading her silver name tag. He stowed his leather duffel bag in the overhead bin and sank into the wide leather seat. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, Mr. Hayes?" Sarah asked, offering a warm towel on a porcelain tray. "We have champagne, sparkling water, or I can brew a fresh pot of dark roast." "Sparkling water would be excellent. Thank you," Sterling said. As she turned toward the galley, he pulled out his laptop and connected to the aircraft's satellite Wi-Fi network. The heavy, twin GE-90 engines roared to life, vibrating through the floorboards as Flight 808 finally pushed back from Terminal 4. As the massive aircraft climbed through the dense October cloud cover over the Atlantic, Sterling began his real work. The incident at Gate B-22 wasn't just a dramatic anecdote. It was a symptom of a systemic disease, and Sterling intended to diagnose the entire nervous system of the company before they touched down at London Heathrow. He booted up an encrypted portal connecting directly to Hayes Capital's private servers in Chicago. He opened a secure video conference link, connecting with Jonathan Davis, a senior partner at the high-powered corporate law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, who was spearheading the legal transition for the Meridian acquisition. "Sterling," Jonathan's voice came through the headset, crisp and professional. He was sitting in a high-rise office in Manhattan, the city skyline glowing behind him. "I just got off the phone with David Collins in Atlanta. Word of the JFK incident is spreading through the executive whisper network like wildfire. The old board is panicking." "Let them panic," Sterling said, typing rapidly as he pulled up Meridian's internal human resources database. Because he was now the majority owner, he had unrestricted superadmin access. "I want you to look into something for me, Jonathan. I'm running a query on our former gate agent, Stella Higgins, employee ID 88492. Sterling watched as the data populated on his screen. His eyes narrowed. Just as I suspected. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the past 5 years, Higgins has accumulated 14 formal passenger complaints regarding hostility, racial profiling, and unauthorized ticket cancellations. Jonathan whistled softly on the other end of the line. 14? In any normal corporate structure, she would have been terminated after the third strike. How did she survive? "That's exactly what I'm looking at," Sterling muttered, tracing the digital paper trail. He found the signature on every single HR dismissal form. Every single complaint was intercepted and dismissed with a retraining note by the JFK station manager, a man named Gregory Thorne. And looking at Gregory Thorne's file, he was promoted to station manager by none other than the outgoing Vice President of Human Resources, who sits on the current board. "It's a localized protection racket," Jonathan deduced. "Middle management protecting their friends on the front lines, shielding them from corporate oversight, resulting in a completely toxic customer experience." "Exactly," Sterling said, his voice hardening. "This is why the airline is losing $3 million a week. We are alienating our highest-paying demographic because the people at the top are too busy protecting their fiefdoms to manage their staff. Jonathan, I want termination papers drafted for the JFK station manager. Gross negligence and failure to uphold federal non-discrimination statutes. Have them ready by Monday morning. Consider it done. What about Higgins? She's suspended pending review, but she's union, Sterling noted, leaning back in his seat as Sarah Jenkins quietly placed a crystal glass of sparkling water on his tray table. He offered her a polite nod of thanks before returning to the screen. She'll try to fight the termination. She'll claim it was a misunderstanding and demand a union representative. I want this handled by the book. No loopholes. I want the security footage from Terminal 4 pulled, watermarked, and entered into evidence for her hearing. It's going to be a bloodbath on Monday, Sterling. It's not a bloodbath, Jonathan. It's an excision. We are cutting out the cancer so the rest of the body can survive. Have the legal team meet me at the Atlanta headquarters on Monday at 8 a.m. sharp. Sterling closed the laptop, the glowing Apple logo fading into darkness. He looked out the window at the curvature of the earth, the high-altitude sun reflecting off the massive silver wing of the Boeing 777. He had bought an airline on the brink of death. By Monday, he would teach it how to breathe again. Meridian Airways global headquarters was a sprawling, glass and steel campus located just outside the perimeter of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. On Monday morning, the atmosphere inside the building was thicker than Georgia humidity. The press release announcing Hayes Capital's multi-billion-dollar takeover had hit the wire at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Wall Street was buzzing. The stock was experiencing a massive volatility halt, and the legacy executives were barricaded in their offices, waiting for the axe to fall. Sterling Hayes arrived at exactly 7:55 a.m. The grey hoodie and faded Levi's were gone. Today, the CEO wore a bespoke, midnight blue Tom Ford suit, a crisp white poplin shirt, and a posture that radiated absolute, uncompromising authority. He bypassed the executive elevator, taking the stairs two at a time, flanked by Jonathan Davis and a phalanx of silent, sharp-eyed corporate attorneys from Sullivan and Cromwell. His first stop was not the boardroom. It was the third-floor Human Resources Disciplinary Wing. In a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room, Stella Higgins sat at a long mahogany table. She looked vastly different from the arrogant gate agent who had commanded Terminal 4. Her uniform was gone, replaced by a conservative grey pantsuit. Her face was pale, drawn, and etched with sleepless anxiety. Next to her sat a grizzled union representative, shuffling a stack of papers and looking bored. Across the table sat two nervous mid-level HR managers who had drawn the short straw of conducting this specific termination hearing. Ms. Higgins, one of the HR managers began, clearing his throat. We are here to discuss the events of last Tuesday at JFK Terminal 4. The company is recommending immediate termination for gross misconduct. Now hold on a minute, the union rep interrupted, slapping his hand on the table. My client is an 8-year veteran of this airline. She made a procedural error regarding a heavily restricted ticketing code she had never been trained on. To jump straight to termination is a violation of her collective bargaining agreement. We are willing to accept a 2-week unpaid suspension and mandatory sensitivity training. Stella sniffled, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. I thought he was using a stolen credit card, she whispered, playing the victim perfectly. I was just trying to protect the airline's revenue. I didn't know who he was. The heavy oak door to the conference room suddenly clicked open. Sterling Hayes walked in, followed closely by Jonathan Davis. The air in the room instantly froze. The two HR managers scrambled to their feet, their chairs screeching against the carpet. The union rep frowned, looking at the newcomers in confusion. Stella Higgins took one look at Sterling, and all the color entirely vanished from her face. She looked like she might physically be sick. "Please, sit," Sterling commanded, though he remained standing at the head of the table. He looked down at the union representative. "You must be Ms. Higgins's counsel." "I am," the rep said, standing up to assert his authority. "And who are you to interrupt a closed disciplinary hearing?" "My name is Sterling Hayes. I am the Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder of Meridian Airways," Sterling said, his voice a low, perfectly calibrated instrument of power. He slid a sleek tablet across the mahogany table until it rested directly in front of the union representative. "And I am here to ensure that this airline's revenue and its reputation are indeed protected." Sterling tapped the screen of the tablet. High-definition security footage from Gate B22 began to play. It was completely unedited, accompanied by crystal-clear audio captured from the podium microphone. The video played the entire agonizing interaction. It showed Sterling calmly presenting his pass. It showed Stella violently snatching his phone. It broadcasted her mocking laughter, her condescending tone, her explicit threat to call the police, and finally, the shocking visual of her physically tearing his printed boarding pass in half and throwing it on the counter. The union representative watched the screen, his jaw slowly tightening. He had defended hundreds of employees against corporate overreach, but he was a pragmatist. He knew dead weight when he saw it. As the video concluded with Stella screaming about trespassing over the PA system, the rep slowly slid the tablet back across the table. "Ms. Higgins claimed she was acting out of an abundance of caution," the union rep said, his voice devoid of its previous bluster, strictly covering his own legal liability now. She stated she felt physically intimidated. "Does that video look like caution to you?" Sterling asked coldly. "Does it look like she was intimidated by a passenger who never raised his voice, never stepped out of line, and fully complied with her demands? Or does it look like an employee intoxicated by her own minimal power, exercising blatant racial and socioeconomic profiling against a paying customer?" The room was deathly silent. I can do better," Stella choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Hayes, please. I'll take a demotion. I'll work baggage claim. If you fire me for cause, I lose my pension. I lose my health insurance. Please." Sterling looked down at her. He felt no vindictiveness, only a cold, clinical certainty. "Ms. Higgins, the hospitality industry requires exactly that. Hospitality. Your actions last Tuesday were not a mistake. They were a revelation of character. You do not view passengers as people. You view them as inconveniences. Because you were fired for gross misconduct and violation of federal anti-discrimination laws, your union protections are voided. Your severance is voided." Sterling turned to the HR managers. "Process the termination immediately. She is to be blacklisted from any future employment with Meridian Airways or its subsidiaries." Without waiting for a response, Sterling turned and walked out of the room, leaving Stella Higgins to face the absolute, crushing reality of her own karma. The rest of the day was a corporate slaughterhouse. Sterling and his legal team moved into the executive boardroom on the top floor and systematically dismantled the old regime. By 3 p.m., the Chief Financial Officer, the VP of Human Resources, and the JFK Station Manager, Gregory Thorne, had all been forcibly resigned. But Sterling wasn't just a destroyer, he was a builder. At 4 p.m., he held a company-wide town hall, broadcast live to every break room, hangar, and terminal in the global network. Standing behind a podium, looking out at the anxious faces of thousands of employees, Sterling laid out his vision. he announced an immediate 20% raise for all frontline gate agents and flight attendants, funded entirely by liquidating the lavish corporate bonuses of the ousted board members. He announced a fleet-wide interior renovation, starting with the 777-300 ERs. Most importantly, he established a zero-tolerance policy for passenger profiling and abusive management. "Power in this company will no longer be used as a weapon," Sterling promised, his voice ringing through the broadcast. "It will be used as a tool to lift our standard of excellence. We are not just flying planes. We are moving people's lives. From this day forward, Meridian Airways will treat every single passenger, whether they are in Seat 1A or Seat 45J, with the dignity and respect they deserve." The story of the undercover CEO and the arrogant gate agent didn't stay internal for long. Within weeks, the incident leaked to the business press. It became a legendary case study in corporate accountability and the profound dangers of implicit bias. Aviation bloggers analyzed it, business schools taught it, and the public devoured it. Meridian Airways didn't recover overnight. It took 3 years of grueling work, massive capital injection, and relentless culture shifts. But slowly, the bleeding stopped. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb from the abyss. The stock price tripled. And it all started with a torn boarding pass, a plain grey hoodie, and a man who understood that true power doesn't need to scream to change the world. Sometimes, it just needs to stand its ground and wait for the truth to reveal itself. The spectacular downfall of Stella Higgins and the immediate restructuring of Meridian Airways serves as a masterclass in modern corporate justice. It proves that a toxic culture on the front lines is almost always a reflection of negligent leadership at the top. Sterling Hayes didn't just fire a bad employee. He fundamentally rewired the entire ecosystem of a failing multi-billion-dollar company. By prioritizing human dignity over archaic corporate protectionism, he turned a dying brand into an industry leader, proving that treating people with basic respect isn't just morally right. It's the ultimate business strategy. If this story of undercover corporate justice and instant karma kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a satisfying comeback story. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more incredible real-life tales of power, pride, and ultimate redemption.